compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version.
Being a person. Members of the top echelons of society crowded near a mansion in Alexandrov Street. Even the opening of a stylish open-air restaurant nearby hadn't caused such a commotion. The opening of the first Semipalatinsk Library and Museum in one building in October 1883 could be called a cultural revolution. A small anthropology museum and cosy reading room where you could find quite a good book collection were situated in a modest wooden building. I was surprised to see the works of Spencer, Buckle, Lewis, Mill, Darwin, novels and stories by Scott and Dickens. The educated people and the taste of those who selected these books deserve full credit. The Semipalatinsk Library changed American journalist George Kennan's opinion of the city for the better. However, the foreigner visited it 2 years after it had opened. Let's look at how it all began. There are a few versions in literature of the first time they met. It's said that without Mikhailis, the world wouldn't have heard of Abai. Abai consulted his Russian friends and together they put his ideas into practice. Chapter 1. An Agile Mind shows the way. In the 19th century, this house belonged to the two merchants, the Yershov brothers. According to some, whilst in Semipalatinsk, Abai visited this house. Usually Abai spent the winter here engaging in self-education. Of course, when he arrived here in 1833, first, he went to the reading room. An event which occurred there became a historical anecdote. "Since when have camels been allowed into the library?" a visitor asked with contempt. Abai wasn't taken aback by this and answered, "Mr. Officer, if a donkey is inside, why can't a camel come in?" When everybody started laughing, he asked the librarian for Russian bulletin. A short man with dark beard and broad forehead was standing near a writing desk and turned to Abai. "I have this issue now. I have already looked through it and can give it to you," he said. "However, first tell me, why do you want to read it?" "There's a new novel by Tolstoy published there, and I would like to read," answered Abai. They met in Semipalatinsk Library. There's some information that Mikhailis heard that some Kyrgyz read Tolstoy and became interested in this person.
Читает Толстого. Его заинтересовал этот человек.
Mikhailis had already heard about Abai. According to Mukhtar Oezov, Yevgeny Petrovich had heard about Abai, who had disrupted an election. He noticed that his countrymen were persecuted, became indignant about it, went away, and people living in all the villages followed him. Later, he had to pay for this action.
Вот это вот здание тюрьмы, вот сейчас мы слева видим.
This is a prison building. On the left, we can see a fence wall. It was constructed in 1870, and since then it hasn't been reconstructed or repaired for almost 150 years. Thus, the building has remained in its original form.
Не реставрировалось, не ремонтировалось, то есть здание сохранилось в первозданном виде.
It was the 10th day of Abai's imprisonment in Semipalatinsk. Although it wasn't a real prison, only a temporary place of detention attached to the police department. Prisoners were treated quite harshly. The conditions there were different from the three-step life which Abai was used to. He managed to put up with it and spent almost all of his time reading. It's said that Mikhailis even attended the trial which the steppe dweller faced because he had disgraced the officials of the Tsar. However, there are no written documents regarding this. Mikhailis and Abai spent time from October until March in Semipalatinsk, cultivating cordial relations with each other. It was when Mikhailis lived there. It's my belief that they met much earlier, in 1883.
К версии ближе, что они познакомились намного раньше, чем в 1983 году.
Most probably they had heard a lot about each other. Thus, when they finally met, they couldn't stop talking to one another. Their conversations were about life, honor, homeland, and the meaning of being a person. They left the library together and walked slowly along the bank of the Irtysh. Abai's chapan, a kind of coat, was unbuttoned, and he was holding a whip and tumak, a Kazakh headdress, in them. Bai Magambet was following them on a horse and couldn't understand why Abai was walking in order to talk to some Russian. Chapter 2. Talking from the heart about everything. Kitai Kunambayev wrote that Abai said Mikhailis was the person who introduced works by famous Russian writers such as Pushkin, Lermontov, Nekrasov, Turgenev, Dostoevsky, Belinsky, Dobrolubov and Pisarev to me. He did for me more than my own father did because he opened my eyes to the world. This is what Abai said. The great poet also introduced a new world to Yevgeny Petrovich during their lengthy conversations on the bank of the Irtysh. Mikhailis thought, between the ancient world and the Renaissance there were a few centuries of cultural darkness, and only Eastern culture lit that darkness. Abai, who spoke Arabic and Persian fluently, introduced poetry by Nizami and the philosophical ideas of Navoy to his friend. The friendship between these two great people, the Kazakh educator, poet and writer Abai Kunanbayev and Yevgeny Petrovich Mikhailis, was of great benefit to both of them. The islands of the Irtysh were covered with green thickets in spring. Both friends spent a lot of time walking along the riverbank, and sometimes they went to Polkovnichi Island by boat and spent hours talking there. Day by day, their conversations became more interesting. Mikhailov was only 4 years older than Abai, but his life was filled with events he had witnessed or participated in and seemed extremely difficult to Abai. In Mukhtar Oezov's book, Mikhailis goes by the surname of Mikhailov, which is the only difference between the book character and the real person. Of course, we have to exclude the ideological component which Mukhtar Oezov had to include in his novel. Nevertheless, the appearance and the events are biographically accurate.
Yevgeny
Petrovich Mikhailis was born on September 26, 1841 in St. Petersburg. He participated in the revolutionary events of the 1860s. He was a member of the Narodnaya Volya organization. Yes, he was a member of the organization Narodnaya Volya, or People's Will. He knew Chernyshevsky and Dobrolubov. Later, he was arrested for participating in a demonstration. Mikhailis spent years in Siberian exile, and then in 1869 he was allowed to go to Semipalatinsk. Thanks to Yevgeny Petrovich and other exiles, the legendary library was established. At that time, Mikhailis was the head of the Regional Statistical Committee. It was the only organization exploring the region at that time.
Это фигура мирового масштаба. Те исследования, которые сделал Михаилис.
He was a global figure. The research carried out by Mikhailis in Semipalatinsk was topical throughout the 20th century, and even now his research remains topical.
Да и, пожалуй, и сейчас они не перестают быть актуальными, эти исследования.
Thanks to influence exerted by his friend, the founder of Kazakh literature was elected a full member of the Statistical Society. There are a few assignments, among which there are 2 or 3 notes for the Geographical Society, a few words about the origin of Kazakhs, translations of works by Pushkin, Lermontov, Krylov, and folk fairy tales. The poet's contribution to the museum, which was established together with the library, was also enormous. Abai's ethnographic collection provided a basis for the depository of his memory. Chapter 3. Wherever Destiny Lies. This furniture was once in Abai's house. He sat at this desk and wrote poetry. Incidentally, only 2 poems were published during his lifespan. They were How I Was Chief of the Lost and Summer. Of course, he read Summer to Mikhailis, as he knew that Yevgeny Petrovich was fond of poetry. The member of the People's Will could appreciate the beauty of Abai's steppe epithets too. Mikhailis spoke Kazakh fluently, and when he heard Tatiana's letter for the first time, he immediately noticed that the feelings of Abai himself had been added to the outpouring of feelings of Pushkin's young lady. That Pushkin understood a Kazakh girl's heart very well, thanks to Abai. They expressed their feelings, thoughts and expectations when they met every day in winter and in letters, which they always wrote to each other. Then neither the surveillance, the revolutionary commoner Mikhailis and dangerous element Abai were under, or distance hindered the development of their friendship. There are some, well, not recollections, but rather suppositions that having lived in Semipalatinsk for quite a long time, Mikhailis was exiled to Ust-Kamenogorsk in order to keep their friendship under control. Abai visited often the house in Bolshaya Street in Ust-Kamenogorsk, where he discussed with Yevgeny Petrovich the education of his children studying at Russian schools, and where he met Mikhailis' wife. Yevgeny Petrovich Mikhailis and Yelizaveta Alexeyevna married on August 20th, 1891. Nothing is said about the lady's age. She was 33. So if she was 33, then was he 55? Ludmila Mikhailis' only daughter was from this marriage. There are some reminiscences of Ludmila Yevgenyeva, Mikhailis' daughter, that when Abai Kunanbayev was in Ust-Kamenogorsk, they sat on a bank of the Irtish and the girl sat on his lap. Epilogue. Remember the fragility of life. Feeling that he was approaching death, he looked through his archives, including materials on geological research in the Altai, which lasted many years, drawings of inventions, articles for English and German newspapers, and thick bundles of letters. They were from his dear friend Abai, who had died 10 years ago. Abai Kunanbayev died in 1904. I think that they carried on a great deal of correspondence, but unfortunately it hasn't survived. Perhaps Yevgeny Petrovich thought that it was impossible to burn memory when he was throwing another bundle into the fire. Those letters he thought could cause harm to friends. He had many letters because he had had correspondence with Mendeleev, the famous writer Barbarikin, and Kovalevsky. The correspondence was voluminous, and according to his daughter, he burnt everything.
Буквально вот незадолго, по воспоминаниям дочери, он сжег эту переписку.
Abai wrote to Mikhailis, "A bad friend is like a shadow. Even if you try to run away from him during a sunny day, you won't be able to, while on a foggy day, you won't be able to find him." Both of them were lucky because they had many loyal, reliable friends and pupils. However, such kinship and harmony as was between them was probably achieved only once and lasted for 20 years.